Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. Today I'm doing a book review of Redsight by Meredith Mooring. This is a book from Rebellion Publishing. It comes out February 27th, 2024. It is a fantasy sci-fi. I received this book from NetGalley in exchange for a fair review. A fantasy sci-fi with a cool premise and a female-centric cast, Redsight, at least for me, fell flat a bit, but it would be a great book to transition someone from YA to adult fantasy. So what is it about? Corinna has simple, stay on the Navitas. Okay, there's a typo in the, in the blurb. Something about Corinna staying on the Navitas, stay out of trouble, and stay alive. She may be a Red Seer, a blind priestess with the power to manipulate space-time, but she is the weakest in her order, useless and outcast, or so she's been raised to believe. As she takes her time as a navigator on an Imperium ship, Corinna's full destiny is revealed to blood brimming with magic. She's meant to become a weapon of the Imperium and a pawn for the order that raised her. But when the ship is attacked by the notorious pirate Aster Heron, Corinna's world is ripped apart. Aster has a vendetta against the Imperium and an all-consuming dark power that drives her to destroy everything in her path. She understands the world in a way Corinna has never imagined, and Corinna is drawn to her against her better judgment. With the Imperium and the justice-seeking warrior Sahar hot on her heels, Corinna must choose her side, seize her power, and fulfill her destiny, or risk imperiling the future of the galaxy and destroying the fabric of space-time itself. Tall order there. The best thing about this novel for me was the disability and queer representation. I'm going to say all the good stuff as well, but I will admit I skimmed the last 100 pages or so of this because I just wasn't engaged. The resolution denouement after the climax was also pretty obvious, and everything wrapped up incredibly quickly. It's a good debut. I think the author has great potential, and I will totally check out another book by her in the future, but it did have some kind of debut things about it. The book starts out very strong, though. It has an interesting premise that you heard in the jacket copy, and a relatable character that has been controlled by her order. She's also a person with blindness caused by her magic. What's great about her depiction is that there's a common misconception that to be considered blind, you can't see anything but blackness. So this really contradicts that idea, and in a good way. The book also features lots of people of color and a sapphic romance, which is great for diversity in the genre. The main character, Corinna, is initially likable and then she's very sympathetic, but her goals or motivations are kind of all over the place. One day she wants to be a gardener, the next she wants to be a pilot. One day she's ready to forego all for her insta-lover, and the next day she's ready to escape. There's also a bit of a chosen one dynamic happening for her that was a bit, contrived. She's had her power tampered down for years to protect her, but then as soon as she's allowed to use it, she's the best in the order. She is just like a prodigy. This felt very YA to me, and I was kind of like, okay. The other two characters, Aster and Sahar, I found more interesting, but the one I really was interested in learning about Sahar, barely gets any page time, a few chapters in the entire book. It seemed like her POV was included simply to explain one plot point. Aster was all over the place, too. She's supposedly 1,000 years old, but she acts like a young person who doesn't really know what she's doing. Her magic abilities were really fantastical. A bit too much for me. I was like, how is this physically possible? Also, all three women had a very similar narrative voice that kept them from feeling entirely distinctive. They all seemed to go through the same issues, the same concerns, the same qualms. And I was like, okay, maybe break this up. Now, to take us down a little path for a moment before I get to my next point, I thought it'd be fun to define sci-fi fantasy versus fantasy sci-fi. So I think to be sci-fi fantasy is where you take a science fiction world build with a fantastical element. Star Wars is a great example of this, as most of it is science fiction, but the Force is magical. Some Star Wars movies and shows are more fantasy-ish, the ones that focus on more Jedi stuff, but some, Rogue One has barely any Force stuff, which would be squarely sci-fi. For books, Ten Lo is a great example of a sci-fi fantasy, as well as one I read last year, The Prince of the Wasteland. The Stand would be, I would say, a sci-fi fantasy because we have a little bit of magic with Randall Flagg, but everything else is very sci-fi. Fantasy sci-fi, by contrast, is like this book. The main focus of the book is the magical aspects. It just happens to be set in a sci-fi setting, like space or future Earth. Examples of books of this would be, the Broken Earth trilogy, this book. The Dark Tower, I would say, is a fantasy sci-fi versus, as I said, The Stand is a science fiction fantasy. And then Gideon the Ninth, of course, would be a fantasy sci-fi. Back to this novel, while I have no issue with fantasy sci-fi at all, the world building was a bit light for me. It wasn't complex enough politically between the three orders and then the rest of the government. I wasn't sure why the main government cared so much about the Umbra. I don't know where these goddesses came from initially, or how a ship that is capable of sustaining 1 million people requires a witch to fly it rather than just a complex AI. Like, if they have the technology to build a spaceship that can house 1 million people, how do they not have AI? I don't know. It's not explained. Maybe it's just me being picky, but I was kind of like, how is the complexity of this spaceship even maintained without, something a bit more robust than human brains? I don't know. I don't know. Now, I did think that the descriptions for how Corinna and the others controlled Tactus, something else that wasn't super explained, and the ships, was well done and easy to picture. I just wasn't sure how it slotted into the world building as a whole. The rest of the writing was actually clear and easy to follow, but there was some repetition of concepts and emotions as well. In truth, as I said, it feels like a debut, but I feel like the author is a very promising writer, and I would totally check out something that she writes in the future. There was just too much going on in this book. It should have been toned down a bit, or it could have been broken into a duology or maybe even a trilogy. Yeah, it's too bad I didn't love it, because when I first started, the first 20% or so I was really, really into, but then, yeah, after that it kind of drifted off for me. Drifted off into space. So yeah, thank you again to NetGalley for the e-arc. I really appreciate it, and thanks for checking out my video.